Today I'm going to talk about the novel The Stranger by Albert Camus. First, a few little notes. Albert Camus is an absurdist. Absurdism is basically derives from the absurd, which the absurd is the human desire for meaning and the inability to find it. And absurdism says life has no objective meaning. You can't find anything, any certain transcendent meaning. But what does that matter? Live on anyway. Find your own subjective meaning in the suffering because you feel things, and those things, if you decide they're worth something to you, even though it might not matter transcendentally, why throw away this opportunity to live and experience all this stuff in this strange, weird little world? That's a very, very convoluted way to say it, but so this was a book that popular. This, along with Albert Camus' essay *The Myth of Sisyphus*, this novel written by him, really, you've probably heard of it before. So it tells the story of Merceau. Spoiler warning from this point on. It tells the story of a man named Merceau. Now Merceau's mother dies. And while Merceau doesn't really feel emotional about it, he's just kind of like, he can't even remember. He's like, the beginning line you've probably heard before is, "My mom died today, or maybe yesterday, I don't know. I got a telegram from the home. Mother deceased, funeral tomorrow, for faithfully yours." That doesn't mean anything. Maybe it was yesterday. So that was the first few lines of this book that you've probably heard before. So Merceau doesn't really care, and while he's mourning his mother, he's sitting there, and this was written in 1946, and this was written. Albert Camus is French. He grew up in Algiers, and this takes place in Algiers. Merceau, technically, when you drink coffee while you mourn, it's like kind of an unspoken rule that you drink it black. You don't put anything in it, and that you don't smoke. Well, when offered coffee, Merceau says, "Well, I'll take it with milk," because he's just indifferent. He says, "That's why would it matter anyway?" He doesn't even really address it in the book, but because it's just like it's just arbitrary. Why would drinking coffee with milk in it be disrespectful, but drinking coffee black not be disrespectful? Well, why would? So he takes, when offered coffee, takes his with milk, and then he smokes, and he's sitting there with the funeral home owner. While he mourns, and he starts smoking, and he offers the funeral home owner a cigarette. And even though the owner knows he's not supposed to, he takes a cigarette and they smoke together, which will come into play later. Then, it kind of all takes place, the first part all takes place immediately after his mother's death, like in the days after this funeral. So, Merceau meets a man named Raymond. Now, Raymond is a very rough around the edges guy with a criminal past. And Raymond, the way they meet is they live in the same apartment building, and one night they're talking together, and Raymond says, "Hey, I got some sausage back in my apartment. Why don't you come over?" And Merceau says, "Hell, why not? That way I won't have to cook." So they're having dinner, they're drinking a wine, and at one point Merceau is sitting there, and Raymond says to him, "Could you do me a favor? I think my woman is being promiscuous, and I want to lure her back to my apartment so I can make her feel the way I felt, beat her up, slap her around, and get my payback." And Merceau's very indifferent, so he says, "Well, I can if you want me to." So he writes the letter for Raymond, and it works. Raymond sends the letter, the woman comes back to his apartment, and he beats her and chews her out. Raymond gets taken into the police station. Merceau has to come and vouch for him. So even though Merceau's just indifferent, Raymond is not indifferent, and he thinks of him and Merceau like this, and he feels indebted to Merceau from now on, because he's not indifferent. He sees Merceau as his dear friend, but Merceau's like, we are friends, but it kind of just doesn't really matter. But anyway, so then Merceau meets a woman named Marie, and they sleep together. Merceau used to know Marie in his past, but they're reuniting now after years, and they start a relationship, and it moves very quickly, and Marie says to Merceau very quickly, days, "Hey, you want to get married?" It might have been weeks. "You want to get married?" And Rousseau says, I mean, we can if you want to. I don't really care one way or the other. And Maria says, well, okay. She's kind of a little weirded out by it, but she says, well, okay. But anyway, then Rousseau's talking with Raymond, and Raymond's aware of Marie now, and he says, well, hey, me and my buddy are going down to a beach house this week, and you should come hang out there with us. So, you and Marie. So, Rousseau and Marie go over to the beach house. And while they're down there, on a walk, Raymond and Rousseau encounter some Arabs from Raymond's past who see Raymond and they want payback, and they've kind of been looking for him, and they slash him down the arm. And so Rousseau and Raymond go back to the house, and Rousseau says to Raymond, hey man, give me your gun. So Raymond hands him his pistol, and then Rousseau goes for a walk, and he's walking along the beach, and he comes down to this little rock alcove, and he sees the Arab that slashed Raymond. And he kind of stands there, the Arab sees him, and he stands there for a while thinking, well, it doesn't really matter if I shoot or not. And, well, at one point, the sun kind of catches him in the eyes, and an energy goes through him, and he fires 4 shots, killing the Arab. And Rousseau's just kind of indifferent to it. He's like, well, what's it matter anyways? Doesn't matter really what we do. And Rousseau gets taken in, and he gets put on trial, which is the real meat and potatoes of this book. So, during the trial, all these people from Rousseau's past are coming up. And not even his past, just his life. So, they bring in Raymond as a witness, or not even a witness. Some of them are just not witnesses of the scene, but just people that Rousseau knows, kind of like to do a character assessment. They didn't see it happen. I shouldn't have used the term witness, but they bring him in. They bring in. Rousseau frequented a restaurant in Algiers called Celeste's, and the owner named Celeste. He knew Rousseau knew him. So they bring him in, they bring Raymond in, they bring the funeral home owner in. Raymond vouches for Rousseau. Celeste speaks about how he kind of didn't bother anybody when he was an intelligent guy. But then the funeral home owner kind of shows up and talks about how he didn't even care about that his mother died. And I was sitting there with him, and he smoked and he drank his coffee with milk. And then a lot of conversation happened before this, and the judge is like, hey man, didn't you smoke with him? And he says, yes, but only because he offered it to me, and I wouldn't have done it looking back on it. So it's just kind of like, well, it rules for thee, but not for me. So they talk about the entire trial is not spent talking about Rousseau killing the Arab. They're just like, Rousseau killed an Arab. And they kind of just and then they move on. 90% of it, they're talking about how he didn't care that his mother died, he didn't cry, he drank his coffee with milk, he had sex with a woman in the days immediately after meeting her, right in the immediate aftermath of his mother's funeral. He's hanging out with Raymond, this, criminal nut job who beats his wife. He helped Raymond lure the victim of abuse in. They're talking about everything except what actually there's claimed to be having Rousseau's trial for. So you've probably heard in relation to this book, Rousseau's biggest crime was not the killing, but not being emotional about his mother's death. So Rousseau is kind of an absurd hero in the sense that, now the absurd hero is a idea that Camus came up with, that basically someone who, Sisyphus, the myth of Sisyphus was Camus' essay, and the title comes from Sisyphus. The myth of Sisyphus, which was a Greek myth about a king who was sentenced by the gods to push a boulder up the hill eternally, only for it to fall back down. And he would do this over and over again, and he would never succeed, and it was meaningless. But Camus said we must imagine Sisyphus happy. So we gotta look at this and we gotta say, well, sure, it's meaningless, but Sisyphus is up there pushing this boulder. He could find meaning in the struggle, subjective meaning in the struggle. He doesn't need these transcendental values or rules or input. He can just be happy from the stuff that's he finds. Like, you can just keep pushing. Why throw away, it's like I was talking about with absurdism earlier. Why throw away this opportunity? Why not just find our own subjective meaning in the joys and the suffering itself, living life for all it's worth, not folding and turning to a transcendental meaning. And that's kind of what absurdism is about, and that's the absurd hero. And Rousseau is kind of an absurd hero in the sense that he is somebody who's indifferent, but he lives on. He lives in the moment. He's never really worried about anything in his past. He's just kind of like, yeah, I did that. I didn't do that. We can do that if you want to. Yeah, you want to get married? I don't really care, but if you want to. He's kind of this person who says, life doesn't have a meaning, but I don't need it. So, Rousseau, in his trial, ends up getting sentenced to death. He's going to be cut, his head is going to be cut off, he's going to get the guillotine in a public square. And he's given one last opportunity to speak to a religious leader and turn to God. But Rousseau loses it, and he says, what's it matter what I did? I'm just going to die, and no one's going to give a damn. Why should I care? And he says, I'm not turning to God. Screw off, old man, to the priest. And he's kind of just, that was his last opportunity to turn to what society deems necessary. And the last line of the book is, for everything to be consummated, for me to feel less alone, I had only to wish that there be a large crowd of spectators the day of my execution, and that they greet me with cries of hate. Because, he just accepts it and moves on and lives in the moment. He doesn't need it to, he says to himself, well, it's inevitable. At first, he's a bit hesitant to it, like he says here. He said, all I care about right now is escaping the machinery of justice and seeing if there's any way out of the inevitable. So at first he's a little, but then he's a little hesitant about this whole idea of getting the guillotine. And then he just says, very quickly he realizes it doesn't matter anyway. I might as well just live in the now. And I don't need anything more. It's inevitable. I just need people around me screaming words of hate, and that's enough, because people will see that he dies. It's not like it's just life doesn't have any meaning anyway, and his death, nobody's gonna care. So why get all bent out of shape about it? So that's Rousseau is the absurd hero, because he lives life based on the now, and he finds his own. He lives on despite the lack of meaning. And that's the stranger. Now, how much time do I have here? Well, this shows us that society is filled with these arbitrary, pointless little rules, and that people care a lot. And you see this every single day. Nobody cared that Rousseau killed this Arab. They said, that's just an excuse to get him in here because we're all pissed that he didn't cry at his mother's funeral. That's kind of just like... The killing of the Arab was kind of just their excuse to get him in here. Oh, look at you, you little bastard, drinking coffee with milk right while your mother dies. Oh, look at you. What are you, some kind of... You little rascal, smoking cigarettes next to your mother who's dead. They don't care that he killed the Arab as much as they care that, he just didn't conform to their arbitrary rules. And that's society. It's like Kafka's The Trial, where he's never told what he's put on trial for. Those novels are actually very similar. The Stranger and The Trial. If you like Kafka, read Camus. And if you like Camus, I recommend you read Kafka. So, my takeaway is, society is full of these arbitrary little rules, but you don't have to accept them. and that, but you have to look at the fact that and see that society doesn't care if you kill a man, but they do care if you cry or if you don't cry at your mom's funeral. Thank you for listening.